Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. I-375 is not just a concrete thoroughfare. It's a reminder of how Black neighborhoods were sacrificed and how the promise of repair remains unresolved today. When it opened in the 1960s, the freeway bulldozed Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. Those neighborhoods had been cultural and economic hubs for Black Detroiters. Residents were displaced. Businesses were cut off. Decades later, state and city leaders proposed replacing that mile of freeway with a surface boulevard. They said the plan was more than infrastructure. It was meant to acknowledge the historic harm wrought by I-375's construction. But costs for the plan soared. And the design, well, it still looks like a highway to many. Last month, MDOT hit pause. Supporters call this a chance to rethink. Critics worry it means the project may never get off the ground. State Senator Stephanie Chang has been one of the most vocal leaders pressing for change. She's pushed to scale back the boulevard, center safety, and she wants to ensure any new land honors the legacy of families and businesses displaced decades ago. And she joins us now to discuss the project. Senator, welcome back to the Metro.
Thanks for having me back.
Let's start at the beginning, if we could, when I-375 was built and what it did to Detroit's Black Bottom and Paradise Valley neighborhoods. Nearly 8,000 residents were displaced, most of them renters who never received compensation. Hundreds of Black-owned businesses vanished. Why is that history central to the conversation we're having today?
Well, I think it's really important for a number of reasons. One, it's always important to know our history and to not forget it so that we don't repeat mistakes of the past. I'm a firm believer in that. But also because there are descendants of Black Bottom who are alive and well today and who have memories of Black Bottom and memories and photos from, their families. And they certainly have lots of opinions about what should happen moving forward. And so I think that it's important to remember the history of how we got here and also to keep that in mind, as MDOT and the community and the city figure out, what's happening next.
Now, Senator Chang, you held years of engagement sessions about I-375, town halls, surveys, meetings with residents. What did you hear most consistently from the community?
Yeah, so just some background. So I used to live in Lafayette Park for 8 years, and so lived very close to I-375 and crossed over it quite a bit. Going to downtown, going to Greektown with my husband, and so very familiar with the neighborhood, with the area. And have talked to lots of people about this, both as a neighbor and then also, of course, as a state representative and now as a state senator. And so I basically have been following and working on engaging folks on this issue for my entire time in office since I first got elected in 2015. And, of course, this I-375 conversation precedes that even before I started in office. There's been some consistent themes over the years, right there. What we just talked about in terms of honoring Black Bottom and making sure that residents' voices are heard is super important. Finding some type of way to ensure that we are repairing the harm that was done. I think that we continue to hear from businesses. It would have been, under its previous iteration, a giant construction project. And so hearing from, of course, residents about noise and all of these issues, but then also business owners about the harms that it could potentially have on their businesses. Land use, I think, was one of the biggest questions that I think mostly was just a giant question mark because, if the freeway were to turn into a surface level boulevard, there would be quite a bit of excess land. What would that land be zoned as? What could it be used as? I think the community had just so many questions about, what is going to happen with this land, and a lot of skepticism, I think, of, what was going to come. So those are a couple of the highlights.
Do you think MDOT truly incorporated that feedback, or are residents still waiting to be heard?
Well, I think that this pause and this reevaluation that MDOT is now in, and we are in this phase right now, is, I think, hopefully a positive sign that the department really heard loud and clear from residents that there were a lot of concerns that had yet to be addressed. There have been a few examples over the years of concerns being addressed. So, for example, at one point, the design included a 9-lane road. And
impossible. Why would we do that again? Don't we have enough of those?
Exactly. And I think especially for folks that are my former neighbors in Lafayette Park who are used to crossing over the bridge, if the idea is reconnecting and pedestrian friendliness, well, that 9 lanes is certainly not pedestrian friendly. So they did actually change it down to, I think, between 4 to 6 lanes, which is a positive example of listening to a concern and then resolving it. I also know that MDOT was, prior to the pause and reevaluation moment, undergoing another traffic study because they had heard from many of us loud and clear that they needed to do a better traffic study and also account for major events. Because this is not a project that is just happening anywhere. It would be happening, in an area where there are 3. There's multiple sports arenas. Yeah, 3 sports arenas, multiple theaters, lots of offices downtown, lots of restaurants, and so there was just a lot of skepticism about some of the prior traffic studies. And so there are some examples of the department really starting to reengage. And I think that there was sort of also a leadership change on the project that I think was moving us in the right direction. But I think the pause and the reevaluation is a good thing because I hope that it's an opportunity for the department to really sit back and figure out, okay, what do we need to do here and what are the ways that we can better engage with the community going forward.
But Senator Chang, the overarching thing here is money. I mean, the state has already spent tens of millions on planning on some of the things we've been discussing. When so much has already been spent, there's a risk that leaders will say, we've come too far to stop now. How do you make sure that doesn't lead to pushing through a flawed design?
I think that there would be an enormous amount of pushback if something were to be pushed forward that didn't resolve community concerns. And I think that the department recognized that. So I do want to note that there is a clear recognition from a lot of folks who have been engaged on this for a long time that the bridges do need repair. And so something does need to happen. If it's just repairing the bridges, that's one option, right? Or there might be some evolved option of evolved different vision of what might happen with a surface boulevard. I don't know. I think at this point, no one really knows what the future will bring. But I think that there are, my hope is that whatever does happen will be something that includes a design with a lot of community engagement and a lot of community input, particularly with the land use, with pedestrian friendliness, with looking at things from, a complete streets perspective, all of these things that, again, people have been raising for years and years and years.
I mean, this project reflects the city's political will to invest in restorative justice. And so I wonder then how important it is for you, someone who is focused on social justice, to see this come to fruition. I mean, what kind of message does a project like this send to residents if it comes to fruition or not?
Well, I guess it depends on what the final product is, right? So that I think is the big unknown here. So again, I think there is a way to do something that really truly involves the community. Let's get creative, right? There's lots of ideas floating around because we've been talking about this as a community for so long, right? Like there's so many different ideas about what about creating some way to support Black businesses in a different way, in a better way, in that area? What about actually not necessarily, technical reparations, but something that is supporting descendants of Black bottom. The land use, with the lots of different ideas around housing that meets the community's needs. There's also lots of ideas around, green space. I know the Downtown Detroit Partnership has floated around different ideas around a cultural district or around sports and recreation. So there's so many different things that are possibilities here that could be positive for the community.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is State Senator Stephanie Chang. She represents Detroit and has been one of the leading voices pressing for changes to the I-375 Boulevard project. We're talking about the history of the freeway, what the pause means for the future, and whether this project can truly deliver repair for the communities it displaced. I want to go back to the issue of land use. Again, the Boulevard project is expected to free up between 25 and 30 acres of land. That land sits where Black Bottom and Paradise Valley once stood, historically Black neighborhoods. MDOT has said it could be sold to generate revenue for community projects. But we know residents worry it could end up in the hands of developers, repeating this cycle of displacement. Who should control that land, and how should decisions about its use be made?
Yeah. So again, just to remind listeners, because there's a pause and because there's this reevaluation, there is just really no clear answer yet in terms of what the design of the road would look like, or what the design, like how much excess land would happen, because all of this is now up in the air. But if we're to look at what MDOT had previously proposed and the excess land that was on all of the maps and all of the public engagement sessions, I think that there are, again, a number of different things that folks are interested in and looking for. And over the years have definitely heard about green space, about housing, but not housing that is unaffordable for people in the community, supporting small businesses, but particularly there's a lot of folks interested in lifting up Black-owned businesses. Yeah. And again, that undercurrent of really wanting to make sure that we are really highlighting and finding ways to repair with Black Bottom descendants, and they should be the ones really to determine what that should look like. So I will note that the city of Detroit had begun a sort of a framework process to look at all of these different questions, but that is also now on pause. And so one of the concerns that had previously been raised prior to this now pause was the fact that it seemed like the MDOT process was sort of moving forward while the city's process was not yet complete. And so people were saying, well, shouldn't we figure out what this framework looks like and have that influence then what the final design looks like from MDOT's perspective. And so now everything's on pause, which I think can, again, be a positive thing. And I think it's sort of like, well, what happens next? Your question about who should be involved in that decision or who should make that decision. I mean, ultimately, if there is excess land, the zoning board and the city will have a huge role to play in all of this. But I think what I hope for is that residents will really, truly have a voice in determining what happens there. And that was starting to happen with that framework process.
Should there be a mechanism then to guarantee community ownership or benefits for descendants of the families displaced decades ago?
I think that, it's hard to say like what percentage or how much money or like what that should look like, or should there like what kind of mechanism or organization needs to be involved. But I think the overall, at least for consensus, at least from the folks that I have heard from, has been that absolutely there needs to be some ownership and really sort of the folks who should be leading what the determination should be about what happens with regard to that idea of repairing harm should be Black Bottom descendants.
I want to clarify before we run out of time here, who gets the ultimate say? Is it the state or the city? How close are they working in partnership when it comes to the I-375 project? Is it ultimately MDOT who has the final decision?
So, I mean, MDOT has a final decision in terms of sort of what the roadway looks like. The city, because there would be city land, there would be land that then would become the city's, and the city would then, have to go through its zoning process. They would have a lot of say over what happens with that land. But there's also lots of other entities involved, right? The federal government, if there if whatever is developed by MDOT, hopefully with lots of community engagement, which is what we're hoping for, if there is some type of change to what they had proposed prior to the pause, then the federal government might have to actually sign off on what those changes look like. So it's sort of an intergovernmental process that we're talking about here.
I'm wondering, Senator Chang, let's say you get your eyes on a reworked plan. What's the one thing you'll be looking for before you can support it?
Well, okay, so there's so many things, it's hard to narrow down to one, but I think if I had to just look for one major thing, the thing that would jump out at me, either good or bad, would be, well, what does that excess land look like? How much land are we talking about? But then I would also be sort of really looking at, well, how many lanes are we talking about? What does the street design look like? Is it something that will be pedestrian friendly and something that accounts for the folks who live near the project?
So how people-centered is it?
Absolutely.
State Senator Stephanie Chang, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, we'll hear a conversation Tia Graham had with Greg Sims. He's the founder and owner of Smokey G's Smokehouse. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll be right back after the news from NPR and WDET.